So, this is our second writing assignment, which is called What's the Word, Nerd? It's a semantics analysis. This is a real thinker. And so, go slowly through this one as I explain to you how the writing is actually structured and the purpose of the writing, and just the hard work that goes into making a really good essay for this one. This is not an easy one at all. It takes some real deep thinking. And if you don't put the time in to think through it carefully and really enjoy what you're the process of actually building up to even writing the essay, it can fall apart really easily. So take your time with it. Let's talk about the actual assignment. So we're going to write an essay that's going to explore the semantic use of one word in English language. It's very creative. What that means is, as a structure, your writing is going to anchor to simply one word. So you have to pick out a word that has a lot of potential to it, because there's a lot of flat words out there, but a lot of words that you're like, wow, I never thought about all the different ways we use that word. And that's called semantics. Taking a word and realizing, well, in this context, it means this, but when I pair it with this word, it means this, or when I use this phrase, it means this. And so it's neat to read an essay on semantics, because when you get to the very end of it, you're like, wow, I never realized we use the word hand in so many unique ways. How unique. And so we're going to analyze the various uses of that word and its various meanings and its idioms and its figures of speeches that we use in our English language. So the essay may end up being really funny. It could also be very clever. It could be touching. It could be poignant. It could be upsetting. All kinds of perspectives, depending oftentimes on the word you use. Using the word hand might be something that's very poignant, but using the word right might be something that's more philosophical. Using the word die might be something that's much more upsetting. Fall, a word that could be also might lead you to being upsetting, but actually might be more clever. You never know how it might end up, but it's definitely a thinker, and it plays into our logical side to really think logically about what a word's meaning is and how a lot of those meanings interrelate in some way. So the essay is going to be made up of an introduction, a really long listing of short body paragraphs, and a conclusion. I don't want to say how many body paragraphs, but oftentimes you'll have lots, because they're going to be very short, choppy paragraphs, and then a conclusion. So the introduction is very short. I wouldn't do any more than 75 to 125 words. And it's different this time. We're going to begin with an opening paragraph that doesn't mention your word at all. All right. So you cannot use your word in the opening of your paper at all. We call this what we a delayed thesis. So what happens is, in your introduction, you're kind of hinting at your conclusive point, but you never come out and say it. So you've kind of delayed the thesis on us a little bit. For that reason, we're going to avoid writing the introduction to the very end of the paper. I don't want you to even think about what your introduction is until you know what your conclusion is. So we're actually going to start with the bodies of the actual essay. We're going to focus on the different ways of using the word. So the body paragraphs, the meat of this thing, is between 300 and 400 words, where you're going to then focus on how you use your word. So I first wrote that you're going to add a physical space. It's going to be weird, but you're going to have a physical space, meaning a blank space between the introduction and the body. So it's almost like the reader is going to read this introduction, and then there's a space, and then all of a sudden your paragraphs take a different direction. You're like, where in the world is this thing going? And I should feel like that. I should feel like, I don't know how this introduction even connects at all to this essay. And all of a sudden, this essay goes in a completely different direction, and it begins with a series of extended illustrations about the word's usage. So it's best to begin with the most common definition of your word, because that kind of lets the reader connect with you, kind of say, okay, I know how to use that word in that way. And then let your examples kind of flow from there. The paragraphs might seem choppy, they might seem random, but you're leading the reader to a point. So even though the reader might think this paper is sort of scatterbrained, it's not. You know exactly what you're doing. It's very logical in your head, but the reader's just not sure where you're heading with this. And then you hit them with the conclusion. The conclusion is 100 to 150 words. And we arrive at this point, this aha moment, when you bring it all together. You completely synthesize all these different meanings of the word. And all of a sudden, you're like, wait a minute. I see how the opening paragraph connects. I see how all these words connect to this meaning. The word right keeps going back to the same sort of point, or the word hand has this message behind it. Like all of a sudden, you're like, I get it. And they're like, wait a minute, I see why you opened the essay with that. It ties in perfectly. And that is a cool thing. You've delayed the thesis to the end, and when you get to the end, you realize how the beginning very creatively tied into it. So, this is a paper where you must include at least one outside reference to your essay, but you want to use it effectively. You don't want to sound overly academic and pretentious, because sometimes when I say, add in something outside of you, people add in some kind of citation and it sounds really phony. No, the purpose of bringing something outside of you into a paper is to show that you have depth. That it's just not simply you, but you found an example outside of you to kind of support what you're saying. And so that adds more depth to your voice and more validity to your voice as well. And so an outside source can be anything. It could be a reference to politics, to pop culture. It could be a poem. It could be a song lyric. It could be something from history, but it shows a little bit more about you in that you chose that as a way of kind of referring back or using it with your word. You want to make sure that whatever you do bring in relates directly to your word and it's actually a usage of your word as opposed to an example, but has really not really using your word at all directly in it. All right, so be careful of that. This is a very analytical paper. The way we format it is the same as we've formatted in the past. So the same way we formatted the last writing. And it's longer though. This is one of our longer writings we have. So you get anywhere between 485 to 589 words on this one. And hopefully my numbers up here will kind of guide you to getting to that goal. Lastly is our rubric. Very similar to last time. We're going to basically get 9 points for our writing. And this time, because it's a longer writing, I multiply it by 5. So this is going to be 45 points. Your content is most of your points. So that's where you're really giving me really strong, specific examples that are going to lead to a logical, challenging, thoughtful conclusion. This is one where you have to do the legwork. And I'm going to keep using that phrase over and over again. If you only go into it with a few examples of your word, your paper's going to flop. You want to feel like there's so many ways of using your word that you can't squeeze them all into your paper. If you have that, you have a good word, because it's much better to have to leave some things out of your paper than to have to stretch the very few examples that you do have. So make sure you choose a word, really think through it, do a lot of legwork before you even jump into writing. Your diction, once again, is your voice. It should be attitude filled, expressive, it's distinctive, it's engaging, it's conversational, but it's a thinker. You're like, whoa, you're smart. I want to hear that coming through in your diction. Your conventions, this is where we have our commas and our compound sentences, complete sentences, spelling, capitalization, things like that. Real basics, but the only thing that's really new is focusing on making sure if we use a compound sentence, we have it punctuated correctly. Make sure things are formatted the way we formatted last time so we don't lose any points. And once again, I'm going to take a look at your conclusion separately and give you a bonus grade just on your conclusion. This is one of those writings where the conclusion should be just this aha, brilliant idea. And then it also not only synthesizes everything you've written before, but then it ties beautifully back to the beginning. So, classic conclusion here. So, coming along with this are a number of things to get us ready. So the one thing that we're going to focus on first is finding a right word. So you have this plan or this little brainstorm list, and the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to pick 2 words. Oftentimes people come in with one word and they're like, that's the word I want to do. I'm like, I know, but come up with a second word. You might end up using the first word, but you might find after doing that second word, it was better than the first. It's like dating. Yeah, that first person is awesome, but you never know. There might be person number 2, which is even awesomer. And so never marry the first person you started dating. It might be the person you might come back to, but you should definitely see what option number 2 would be. So when you come up with these ideas, come up with 2. Think of really simple words. Don't go heavy on your words. People oftentimes will say, can I use the word love? Can I do the word God? Yeah, they're great words. They're lousy for this paper. And so don't take on big words. Take on easy words like fly, jump, let, run. Simple words like that, which you might be surprised on how many ways we use that word and how many definitions it has. So, the first thing we do is we think of the very first definition of the word that you can think of. And then, can you brainstorm? Can you come up with at least 10 to 12 ways of using that word? Because if you can, that's a great word to use. If you can't think of at least 10 or 12 ways of using that word, then it's not a good word at all. All right. So if you're stretched, you know what? You just got to give it up and go with a different word. If you find that a lot of your definitions are the same, once again, not a good word. Find one that has a wide variety of definitions. Occasionally, people surprise me. I had a girl a couple years ago do the word fluke. I said, well, I don't know if you can find enough to say about the word fluke. And she did. And it was a really good paper. And so sometimes people pick a really good word and they just don't do enough with it. I think the word home is a great word, but you really got to say, okay, there's a lot I can do with it. And don't just simply go with what the first ideas that you come up with. When we say brainstorm, that means legwork. That means going on the internet and typing in your word and finding out all the ways of using it, weird expressions that you have. That's what's going to make a paper stronger, is the person who does his or her legwork. That's going to get us to the first step, which is simply brainstorming. And then eventually we get to the back of our planner. We're going to start breaking it down into organization. I'm going to do the example using the word flesh. And so I took my word flesh and I'm going to focus on how my very first definition is our skin. And then I'm going to look at other ways of using it. I have a huge list of ways of using it that I didn't even know of because I did my legwork and I found other ways of using it. I'm like, wow, there's so much I could possibly say with the word flesh. I can make a really cool paper with this. And so that's what I'm going to work with as my example. As you're writing yours, I'm going to be writing mine on flesh. So we're going to take our brainstorming list. We're going to eventually choose one of our two words, and then we're going to go to the back page and start doing some planning and organizing. How do we organize the body paragraphs to get us to an amazing conclusion? This is a fun one, but it's a thinker. And I'm always amazed on the people in the room who are deep thinkers who come up with some really, really unique words, but also some profound ideas. Sometimes coming out of the simplest words have sometimes the most profound points. And that's usually what's really unique about semantics. You're like, wow, I never thought that deeply about the word left, but that really is a unique word. Okay. There are a number of examples that are posted for you. And if you need some inspiration, by all means, go for it. I drew up one real quickly that I found. This is one from, my goodness, October of 2020. And Maggie Wisniewski, a student in the fall of 2020, did her paper on the word hand. It's a great example, but it's just one of many examples. I will let you know that the examples online vary in length because before I had it as a longer paper. And so some examples might be up to the 700s, and there'll be some papers that are a little shorter, like Maggie's. She writes a successful paper in 573 words. It's perfect. All right. So it's possible to create a really brilliant paper in the word limit that I gave you. All right. So that's where I'm going to stop for right now. But once again, I'm going to encourage you to think really carefully about finding an amazing word to use for your paper.